My name is Nathan Rook. I'm the host for today, but I'll only be talking for a few minutes to introduce our main speaker, who's Brooke Dixon, who you can see next to me here. My name is Nathan. I'm a local government planner from Victoria. There's no need to apologise, Kim, it's all right. Local government planner from Victoria. So this event is nationwide. I just wanted to say hello to everyone, both peer fellows and life fellows, anyone from Australia, anyone from abroad as well. I believe we have a few people from overseas joining us today. And to also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands that we're on today, pay our respects to the elders past, present, and future. Being from Melbourne, I'm currently on Woiwurrung land, I believe, specifically for Wurundjeri people, so Wominjeka in that case. But today's session is the first of three on Plantech. So if you're a bit worried that perhaps you don't know too much about the topic, don't fear. This is, after all, an introductory session. So today's session is focusing on spatial information. There are two others in the series. One is next week on digital plan assessment and design, and a third the week after on spatial info, on basically the digital analytics and assessment. So in general, this series is about Plantech, which is basically how digital technology is being applied to all aspects of Australian society. So we have new technologies coming in, things like smart technology, big data, the Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence. And Plantech is basically how we would apply those to cities and create smart cities. Currently, it presents a lot of opportunities for our profession in terms of things that we can do, but it also has a few challenges. And so these talks are just a small series on how we might be able to apply those things and how to avoid those challenges. In partnership with the Plantech National Working Groups, PIA has been developing a comprehensive Plantech agenda to ensure that planners are empowered to harness the possibilities of Plantech. And this webinar series offers an applied introduction to Plantech, focusing on practical examples, lessons, and insights with reference to the pillars of planning. If you'd like, basically, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce Brooke Dixon formally. So Brooke is from Delos Delta, as you can see in his name tag there, who'll be presenting today. He's also joined by one of his colleagues, Anna, who'll be managing the slides. So Brooke is the managing director of Delos Delta. He's expert in both smart city strategy and project delivery. Brooke's recognised as one of our preeminent smart city practitioners in Australia. He's a former president of the Australian Smart Communities Association, where he worked with the members there to improve smart tech capacity and investment and results. He's also a Churchill Fellow, where he visited and studied the drivers of digital transformation across Asia, Europe, and the Americas, summarising with a 10-point list of principles to help develop smart cities concepts in your city. And Brooke is also an experienced economist, public sector executive, public speaker, change manager, and policy analyst. So if you could please welcome Brooke, who will present for roughly 45 to 50 minutes. Also, just as a brief warning before we start, Brooke, sorry, please make sure that your camera and your microphone are off and muted for the talk, just so we don't get interrupted by anyone furiously typing down notes. And to also let you focus fully on the speaker, please be aware that the talk is being recorded. So if there's any questions that you have, you want to revise, you'll have a chance to do so afterwards. The slides from the presentation will be shared, and the question list as well. We'll be taking questions afterwards if we can't answer them by email. So you'll have a summary of those questions with some answers presented afterwards as well. So you just need to write down notes about what is said without being shown, and potentially any questions that are especially pertinent for you. Otherwise, take it away, Brooke.
Thanks, Nathan. I hope everyone can hear me. Nathan, there was a little bit of choppiness in your talking there, mate. I'm not sure what that was. Hopefully, it was just an interim issue. So, Brooke Dixon here. Pleased to be with you this morning. And thank you so much for making time to be with us. This should be a fun session, the first of three, and I'm really excited to be with you here today and to have such a great turnout. That's fantastic. All right, well, let's get straight into the presentation, colleagues and friends. So Anna, my colleague who's in Melbourne, will bring up the presentation. I hope you can all see it there. I'm going to keep in contact with Nathan during this session, colleagues. So if you do have any burning questions that you'd like to ask, even throughout the session, throw them into the chat, and I might pause every 7 to 10 minutes or so, just to allow Nathan to pull out a salient question. But there will be 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. So don't fear. If you have some questions, we can also wait till the end. And equally, if you want to just throw any additional questions into the chat, I will do my best with my team to answer all those questions post this session. So bear that in mind. All right, I think that's all. I too would just like to echo Nathan's acknowledgement of country and in particular would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, who are the traditional owners of the land here in Canberra, which is where I am, and the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri peoples who are based in Melbourne, where our other office is. And we'd like to express our respect for elders past and present. We'd also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who might be with us in the audience today. Let's continue on. Here's our agenda, colleagues. Hopefully this keeps you interested. Welcome introductions. I'll give you a brief overview of myself, some Prezo parameters and some scene setting, spatial info evolution. We'll chat about digital twins. We'll give you some case studies. We'll talk briefly about IoT, Internet of Things and data, and then we'll draw some conclusions and give you some potential applications of all this plan tech talk. Let's continue there, Anna. So there's me, hello, with somewhat longer hair, but in black and white, which I think is more flattering for myself. I'm the Managing Director of Delos Delta, as Nathan said, a former Churchill Fellow, and I am from originally ACT Government, where I was the Director of Smart Cities and Smart Regulation, but also was heavily involved in spatial planning development for ACT and region. And as Nathan said, the former President of the Australian Smart Communities Association as well. Very pleased to be with you here today. Let's go to the next slide. This is what Delos Delta does, colleagues. We're a management consulting company, specialised in smart cities and communities, data management, analytics, and a few other things, echo, dev, and analysis. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, etc., website, Let's keep going, Anna. And here's just a bit of a snapshot just to make Delos Delta real for you if you haven't heard of us. Very active in the smart city space, innovation, eco dev, not only in the strategies area, but also in the planning and delivery, design, assurance of smart precincts, smart suburbs, smart cities. So there's a little overview of Delos Delta. You can look us up on the web and so forth and so on. Okay, well, it'd be nice, colleagues, considering we're talking about plan tech, to make sure that the world is hearing about this, because as I understand it, this event didn't happen unless it's also reflected and echoed on social media. So there's a couple of Twitter handles there. We have mine at DeBrookie. We have the Planning Institute Australia at PIA_planning. And we have Delos Delta. It's actually at Delos Delta, all one word, no space there. So don't be confused. It's all one word, no space. And I think the hashtag probably should be Plantech, hashtag Plantech or hashtag PIA. But it'd be nice to get a little bit of Plantech action happening on Twitter and show the world that planners in Australia continue to lead, as you have done for many decades. All right, social media. Now, I just want to put this presentation into context. I think Nathan's done a good job there. This is, of course, an introductory session. So there is a lot of ground to cover, but we are not going to go super deep, all right? We can do that in follow-up sessions and conversations. I also want to talk about pretensions. So a lot of words here, pretensions. I have no pretension of being an expert planner. Colleagues, you are expert planners, and I accept and acknowledge and respect that. I bring expertise to the table in terms of smart city, smart tech, digital transformation, and how it applies in the planning sector, in the planning sphere, and beyond. So please bear these caveats in mind. This is very much an information sharing session. I am sharing some knowledge and some expertise, not only from Delos Delta, but from the many contacts we have in this space. Necessarily, because this is an introductory session, there is some element of abstraction and simplification. So please bear that in mind, and I trust that is okay with you, colleagues. I believe it makes for a better one-hour webinar if we simplify things and try not to overcomplicate things, makes things much more engaging. I do hope there is some inspiration you can draw from this presentation, colleagues, but at the same time, I do want to share some reservations. So we want to be excited, but we don't want to be too hyped, and we don't want to get too drunk on the Kool-Aid here. So we want to keep things realistic. And that pertains to the last point here eventually, is there is so much that we can apply in the plan tech space, particularly as regarding spatial information and spatial planning. So ultimately, I hope you can draw out a few points of application big, small, long-term, phased. So this is not just an academic exercise, it is a real exercise. One other thing I might just mention too is I do throughout this presentation mention a few companies and indeed state and local governments. Just bear in mind that I do this for information sharing, for reference, and for your consideration. They are in no ways recommendations or endorsements of the companies and so forth and so on. Okay, so just bear that in mind. It should be quite clear from the presentation, but always just like to make that little caveat there as well. Okay, so there's some parameters for us to think about. I'm also a classicist, my friends. I studied ancient Greek and the classics in my second time at the ANU, and I always like to think back about how far we've come in the spatial planning sphere. This is a map that based on calculations by Ptolemy, who was in about the 2nd century AD. And this is I think a 15th century reproduction of those calculations that he came up with. And you can just imagine how long it took him, how many centuries of data were required to get this quite neat representation of the world. And you can see there, Europe, obviously in the top left-hand corner, above Africa. Not a fantastic representation of Africa there, but nonetheless, that's how they understood it from their astronomical observations and other geographic observations. Saudi Arabia there, quite good. Iran, not bad. India and Sri Lanka, hopeless in terms of the representation of the ancients, but quite incredible. But I think the point that I want to raise here is that this spatial representation, this spatial information system, was the result of literally centuries of information collection, gathering, analysis, compilation, attribution, crossing and checking and cross-checking again and again before they could come up with this map of part of the world. And even then, it wasn't that accurate. So we live in exciting times, friends and colleagues, when, on the next slide here, we have now entered a great big world of plan tech. Now, what is plan tech? Well, in my view, my estimation, my definition is thus. You can Google it yourself and come up with many definitions, but I believe a good definition is the increasing use of technology, data, and innovation to improve planning processes and outcomes. In many respects, colleagues, I acknowledge and recognise and appreciate and respect that the planning sector, particularly in Australia, has been at the forefront of technology adoption and utilisation for decades. So this is not a new concept for you, I understand. I mean, and you can also think of e-planning being a recent manifestation of the continued application of technology in the planning sphere. And you might think of plan tech as, in many instances, being a rebranding of e-planning. But I also think plan tech is very much a natural response to sectoral digital disruption. We've seen digital disruption, how it's affected the economy, how it's affected airlines, banks, taxis, on-demand transport. Every sector of the world society has been impacted by the ongoing digital revolution. The planning sector is not immune from that. So this plan tech phenomena, this plan tech push, this plan tech agenda is a natural and obvious response to that. But as I said, I just want to acknowledge that the planning sector in Australia has been very good on this front. Plan tech also, if you want to put it in the context of smart cities, plan tech is a critical and large element of that broader smart city agenda. It's such a big and important part that in many respects, in some areas, it's almost synonymous because it's so important, but not quite. Okay, and the critical point there too, just in relation to the previous slide, colleagues, is that what once took centuries of information and data gathering to put together a spatial information system, now we can do in seconds, almost in real time in the midst of a digital revolution with multitude of more layers of information than we ever thought was possible. Okay, let's go on to the next slide here, Anna. Now, the plan tech landscape is many and varied, and we'll explore some of these elements and this landscape and some of these frontiers over the next 2 webinars. But this is a little visualization that I quite like. And this is from the Planning Institute Australia website. I think it's drawn from a discussion paper on Plantech that a working group put together over the last few years. So you can see some of the various elements, including the underlying digital infrastructure relating to content, data, transaction and rules, and how that data, that infrastructure can be translated and transformed into various tools, platforms and manifestations of intelligent Plantech applications and manifestations. You've got digital twins, you've got augmented reality and virtual reality visualization there at the bottom left, online mapping portals, analytics for monitoring and evaluation, etc., etc. So there's a whole range of things, and really we could have a whole semester of lectures about the wide and exciting Plantech landscape. In this 1-hour webinar, we are naturally constrained, so we will focus on the evolution of spatial information systems and models with a bit of a showcase or a focus, particularly on digital twins. Let's keep going here. Colleagues, I also want to reiterate the fantastic Plantech principles that Pia and its working group and colleagues and partners have put together. So these are a fantastic introduction and set of values or principles to guide the way we consider and apply and utilize plan technology. So avail yourself of those, colleagues. There is much more information surrounding each of these principles online, but some of those principles we need to really think carefully about. Obviously, the use of open technology so that it's interoperable and we can have connected information systems. Human-centric, obviously we don't want tech to lead the way and forget about humans. We want to make sure that Plantech balances both outcomes and efficiency. Planners remain central to the adoption of Plantech. They are not sidelined by this process. They become central to the process. And a reimagined communication with non-planners there at number 9. A whole host of fantastic principles there. So Nathan, I might just pause there for a second. I think I did see one question pop up, Nathan. Do we want to just quickly go to that question just to take a breath and allow people to hear a different voice?
I would agree with you, but I don't think we have any yet questions. So I can't see one here in the chat function, unfortunately.
Sorry, I have a private question, so I won't say who it's from because it was sent to me privately. Where and when was Plantech invented or defined? This set of seminars is the first time I've heard of it. That's a fantastic question. Look, and I have to say, colleagues, that you mightn't be alone. I think many people in the financial sector would be surprised to learn about fintech, financial technology. Many people in the property management and real estate sector would be surprised to learn about prop tech, property tech. And I still think many people in the IT and ICT sector or the technology sector in general are still surprised and confused about the terminology smart tech or smart cities. Okay, so as I said before, Plantech is probably been around for about a decade, more or less, with greater prominence over the last 5 years. As I said before, it is really just a reimagination, an evolution of e-planning, chat and dialogue in the planning sector. So in many respects, colleagues, it is nothing new. It is just a handy acronym or a handy reduction in the concept to something that gives us a very nice, headline, a nice title. So please don't be worried if you haven't heard about it before. I'm absolutely convinced that you will be immersed in the Plantech movement already. You might just call it something else. Good question. Let's keep going. I also want to draw your attention to, in association with those Plantech principles from Pia, some of the smart tech building blocks that I drew from my Churchill Fellowship in 2016, looking at the best smart cities which have a very, very strong Plantech element, or one and all, around the world. And there's a nice sense of alignment between these principles or values or building blocks and the PEER principles. So again, I encourage you to have a look at that Churchill Fellowship report and see where the similarities lie between PEER and where there might be some differences as well. But I think there overall is a nice sense of alignment there. Let's keep going, Anna. Now, colleagues, essentially when it comes to spatial planning, to my mind, I think this is a useful indication of the evolution, not necessarily a timeline because there are hybrid approaches all through here, but really digital technology and a whole range of other technologies have allowed us over time to move from our 2D spatial representations or spatial models, and we saw a very early version of that from Ptolemy, through to the 3D models, which of course in olden times were often handcrafted or made from whatever it was, wood or plastic or blocks or whatever it was. But of course now in the modern world, the use of digital 3D models, 4D of course being the addition of time so that you can see the 3D rendering change over time, either backwards or forwards. XD plus is what I am calling a world where you've got some sort of 3D representation plus time, plus other layers of information that might relate to utilities, that might relate to topography, that might relate to human behavior, that might relate to the natural environment, canopy cover, that might relate to transport and traffic data. So you can see that the spatial systems have built up over time to multiple dimensions of information. So they are definitely 4D plus. And then of course you have the addition of augmented reality and virtual reality, where you not only have the 4D rendering and the additional layers of information, but you have the technology to be immersed in that 3D or 4D or XD plus rendering. What does the future hold? What does the future hold? Well, long term, I don't wish to speculate, but what I think the next 5 to 10 years holds is really the realization of the great promise of digital twins. And we will talk more about that in due course. Can I also just say on this slide here, colleagues, you can imagine various hybrids and combinations and permutations of these various manifestations. I'm also not saying one is particularly better than the other. Each of these still serves a purpose in the planning world, be it digital or be it hard copy, and each of them remain an important part of your tool belt. Okay, so I'm not saying that we need to throw out some of these elements or indeed, see them as no longer relevant or viable. Let's continue on here. Okay, so I mentioned the digital twin, and I imagine that you've all very much heard of this term now. You probably all used to call them just digital models or 3D models, or as the planning sector has been leaders in many respects, it's basically an evolution and a sophistication of the GIS systems that planners and other practitioners have been using in public and private sector organisations for decades. And I love this little representation on the right here, because the beauty of a digital twin is its ability to give you that XD plus ability, which is the multiple layering of dimensions that you can dig into, that you can visualize, that you can analyze, and that you can interrogate or interface with in various ways within the digital twin. And you saw me make the air quote sign there. So digital twin, again, it's a bit of jargon, it's a bit of terminology, it's marketing if you like, but it's quite neat. I mean, it's very, very attractive. It's a really enticing term that seems to have captured the world's attention, and I believe rightly so. But essentially, a digital twin is a digital replica of a physical thing. So that means it could be a digital replica of a cup, of an engine, of a house, of a road, of a utility network, or indeed of a city. The critical, I guess, quality of a digital twin is it ingests, orders, analyzes, and visualizes data to support planning and decision making. So I'll put that in the planning context there, in particular, colleagues. And there are 5 key capabilities. I've taken these capabilities from the Smart Cities Council, ANZ. I think it's a nice way of thinking about what makes a digital twin a digital twin. It's connected, that is, it is connected to the real world, generally via a range of sensors or information sources. It's integrated in that it integrates many, many layers and dimensions of data and information. It's visual. This is sort of a fundamental quality or capability of a digital twin. It needs to be able to visualize in some way, shape or form the data analysis and perspectives that make it so. It's analytical, obviously. It sucks in data and then spits out analysis, and it needs to be secure. That is, we need to make sure that information and data security, privacy, and indeed ethical considerations are taken into account. So thus is the digital twin. I'm sure you're all familiar with this concept, but I am defining it at length here for the sake of those who potentially mightn't be as familiar at it as some of you. Let's keep going here. I just want to note that originally digital twins wasn't immediately applied to large scale or even small scale spatial planning. Originally it was applied particularly by NASA in terms of doing digital reproductions or replicas of spaceships. It's also very popular in engineering circles, and you can see there a digital twin of an engine, which is used to model and permeate and perturb those physical manifestations in a digital world to understand how they work and how they might not work. Now, the critical thing I want you to imagine here is that in many respects, the production of a digital twin for an engine is that much more simple than the production of a large-scale, holistic, all-encompassing digital twin for something as massive, as multidimensional, as dynamic, and as unknown as a city. And that's a really important point. We've got to be careful about how much we hype up digital twins and appreciate their limitations, while also making great use of the many, many benefits and valuable use cases that they have. This is a really important point here, colleagues, that a digital twin for a city is not simply something that can be drawn out of thin air. Okay, let's keep going. I also want to draw your attention to the Gartner hype cycle here, because I sort of believe that the idea of a all-encompassing, holistic, one ring to rule them all digital twin for a city is probably at the top of the hype cycle right now, or roundabouts. And I think that's a bit of a misapprehension of how digital twins are supposed to be. But where I am seeing fantastic moves into the slope of enlightenment is the considered and deliberate selection of particular use cases and productions of digital twins that do select things very, very well. Okay, and this Gartner hype cycle always reminds me of my time in ACT government when I was working with colleagues and both in state government, federal government, and local government right across Australia. But this is 7 or 8 years ago. I remember speaking about autonomous vehicles, and at the time we were very, very high on the peak of inflated expectations, almost to the point where some people would say, "Oh, we don't need to do that parking strategy or that smart parking venture because autonomous vehicles will change everything, and they're going to change everything very soon." Well, colleagues, I was having that conversation 7 years ago, and they are absolutely right. Autonomous vehicles are a game changer, but that sort of large scale, citywide, incredible change does not happen overnight. So the same with digital twins. We need to be careful that we don't get too caught up on the hype and high on the Kool-Aid, but there are certainly multiple examples of people who are moving into the slope of enlightenment and the plateau of productivity. Let's keep going. Okay, so in terms of digital twins, which in my view is pretty much what the next 5 to 10 years looks like in terms of the evolution or indeed one might even think, if we want to get a little bit poetic, the apotheosis of spatial planning models. I want to draw your attention to a few resources, both now, but also for your edification post this webinar. The Smart Cities Council is doing a fantastic job in many respects, drawing attention to this agenda. They have a host of fantastic resources on their website. They have a draft digital twin blueprint, for example, which is available right now. And they ask 5 critical questions that as practitioners, as organisations, as digital twin builders or users, we need to consider before we jump into the very, very deep water of digital twins. First and foremost, what problems are we looking to solve? One doesn't just simply build a digital twin and expect all planning problems to be solved. To do so is perilous, to say the least. Who needs to be involved? So which of your planning colleagues, which of your other colleagues in your organisation, and I particularly draw attention to your smart city and IoT, IT, ICT colleagues in your organisations. What standards will you apply to govern the digital twin, and in particular the data management? What data is required? Data and analysis do we need to generate insights? Again, we can't simply imagine that the digital twin will just start spitting out analysis that is exactly what we need. That is a pipe dream, to say the least. And of course, what enabling technologies are required. And that might be, connectivity, it might be IoT networks, it might be a range of sensors, it might be a range of integration, equipment and processes. There are many, many enabling infrastructure and technology requirements to move towards a useful and highly utilised digital twin. Nathan, can we just quickly pause if there's any questions that you'd like to draw attention to?
There is, yes. So we've got a question here from Zach about asking, do digital twins allow users to create what-if scenarios? So something related to that analysis you were talking about before.
Look, absolutely. So the ability to simulate and forecast is critical capability of a digital twin. I mean, look, there are many formulations and manifestations of digital twin, but absolutely that ability to, I'll show you something very quickly, very shortly, colleagues, about those sort of what-if scenarios on a very simple frame, but you can do more sophisticated what-if scenarios, and that is why digital twins are proving very popular. Nathan, was there another question that came in?
There is, yes. So we've got another question from Paul here that's asking, just to paraphrase it a bit, that it seems to be very difficult to model the behavior of people within a built environment. So compared to things like inanimate objects, is there any thoughts on that you have in terms of dealing with that sort of challenge?
Yep. Absolutely, and you're absolutely right. I think that was Paul. Fantastic question.
Yeah.
You're 100% right, and I'll just give you some thoughts about that in a second. I've got a case study that deals with that issue, but you're 100% right, and that's one of the limitations of digital twins, colleagues. Very, very good at the physical environment with caveats, but it's harder to understand and model human behaviour. Let's keep going. We've got plenty to get through. I also want to draw your attention to ANZLIC, which I believe is the Australian New Zealand Land Information Council, I believe, if my recollection serves me correctly. They've put together some fantastic digital twin principles. Over there on the left, I'll allow you to read through them. But also I love this little model, this little representation of a digital twin that they've come up with. And you can see there at the bottom, you've got all your general spatial data that colleagues you already have, you already use, and that you have greater expertise than me in, absolutely. Where the digital twin becomes really useful is its ability to ingest or suck in or hoover up a whole bunch of other data sources, particularly in real time, environmental data, social data, infrastructure data, utility data, IoT data, economic data, et cetera, to order them and to work with them through standards, protocols, and enabling technology, ultimately to drive analytics, to drive modeling, to drive simulation. So there's that question about what if, and simulation is just a one element of what if scenario. And of course, in the end, we want to drive better insights, better decisions, and better outcomes. Let's keep going. Plenty of material to get through. So now we get to a couple of case studies. And I see a couple of questions coming through. I'm just going to move through a few of these questions, colleagues, and I'll come to those questions. Most of you colleagues would be aware of the Digital Twin Victoria initiative. which our friends in Victorian government, a couple of the departments there are leading. They are aiming to essentially develop a digital twin or twins. I'll come back to what I mean by that for the state of Victoria, focusing on a range of high value use cases. For example, I think they have an e-comply pilot, which is happening presently with a local council and other partners in Greater Melbourne, using a digital twin and various uses of machine learning, but also other modern planning processes to streamline and fast track compliance processes for particular types of development. What I would like to, so by all means, colleagues, this is an introductory session. I'm not going to go into detail, but you can very easily Google digital twin Victoria to find out more information. What I'm going to focus on the next slide are some of the lessons that that the Victorian government has identified, particularly from their Fisherman's Bend pilot. So data is not readily available for use in decision-making processes. I accept that. I support that as a smart city, I suppose, expert, air quotes. Here's a critical one, colleagues. Governance and org culture are the key barriers to data sharing, not technology. I see this again and again. Technology is not the silver bullet or the magic beans to suddenly make data flourish and become this panacea. It is very much governance and org culture, which are still massive constraints. Stakeholders are excited. We're all very excited by the opportunities that digital twins, particularly for collaboration. But here's a really good one. As 3D data requires, or XD plus data requires significant investment and ongoing maintenance, a deeper understanding is required in order to ensure it is fit for purpose. This is the critical issue, colleagues, is that digital twins are amazing and they bring a whole bunch of new opportunities and possibilities, but you need to be very careful about how you scope it and make sure that it balances costs and benefits and you have very clear use cases. Okay, you can drop a whole bunch of money building a fantastic digital twin, and it may only have minor use cases. Let's continue on, Anna. Let's jump through as much as we can. This is one where I talked about before, and you'll see the source there at the bottom of the example here. Process efficiency, but it also relates to the issue of what if scenarios. And one thing, and this is just a really, you'd all be familiar with this. This is very much a traditional 3D model, but it also is a digital twin in that respect that it brings in or ingests a whole range of other data sources. But in this case, the ability of the digital twin in almost real time for developers to be sitting down with decision makers and the approval authority to understand how a building might change in terms of its impact on the environment, its impact on sightlines and on shadowing is a very, very real application that I have understood has saved months and months, up to 9 months on very large planning and development projects. And I've got that feedback from interviews with both 3D or digital twin model builders, but also from their clients. And you can see in this little GIF here, friends, how they're changing the building in real time, the heights and the dimensions and its footprint. And you can also see the sight line there from a citizen on the street. And the idea here, and this is a really, really valuable use case, is the idea of digital twins and 3D models driving process efficiency. Let's hark back to the PIA principle that we must balance process efficiency with planning outcomes. So it's not all about running through planning processes as quick as possible. We also want to drive better outcomes. Let's go to the next case study. Here's City Lens from our friends at Wyndham Council in Greater Melbourne to the west there. So our colleagues used council money, but also some grant funding from the Australian government to put together a augmented reality version of their city and an upcoming new development. And what was the use case in this particular instance? The use case was to improve engagement with the community and with critical stakeholders through that planning, development and approval process. And the city found that it they derived a range of improvements in terms of people's ability to understand, comprehend, and provide informed feedback about the development, about their concerns, and about particular aspects of that, AV, VR, digital twin / 3D model. Now, it can be unpacked in many, many ways, but the ability to use 3D models and digital twins to improve, enhance, broaden, deepen community consultation and engagement is a very, very valuable use case. And again, one where a 3D model can give you a good return on investment. Let's continue on here. Another case study. You'll see down the bottom there, colleagues, I've drawn this case study from Neighbourlytics. Many of you might be aware of that company, but of course there are many companies in this space that do this. And this relates to the question about understanding human behaviour and human activity and human purposes and intentions and the way they go about things. So what Neighbourlytics and a range of other companies do is they scrape the internet and various other existing data sources for information about what people are thinking. So you can imagine that is prevalent on social media, on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, and through various data that is collected by mobile phone applications to understand how people are moving through the city, their sentiments in particular places, why potentially they make certain decisions, align those decisions and those behaviours with particular demographic information to give us a better understanding of human behaviour, human intentions and human characteristics in a particular area of the city, which is then used to inform spatial plans, which is then used to inform development and utilisation of open spaces and places or public infrastructure, public transport, etc., etc. So this is one way that human data, people, place, sentiments, activities is being ingested into digital twins and 3D models to give planners, city builders, decision makers, policy makers a better understanding of what people are doing. Let's continue on. I'm going to go to finish here, colleagues, and then we'll open up for questions. I also like this little case study here. This one comes from SiteHive, who use an IoT-based system to actually understand what's happening on site once a development has been approved. This is from the Western Sydney Airport. They monitor things like noise, air quality, vibrations, and various other activity and environmental monitoring concerns on those sites to continue to give us real-time information about what is happening through a development process. And that information you can see there depicted on a dashboard, but equally can easily be ingested into a 3D digital twin or such to give you that line of sight right through a planning and development process from cradle to grave, which I think is another exciting manifestation of digital twins and plan tech in this sector. Let's continue on. Okay, and I've mentioned IoT a few times, and that is promised in the webinar advertising. IoT, the Internet of Things, the ability for ubiquitous connectivity and small sensors, which are very powerful at collecting environmental data, social data, economic data, physical asset data, network data, utility data, building information data. That is a game changer for digital twins, 3D models, spatial information system, call it what you will, because you now have a whole array of data being collected in real time that can be sucked in, ingested, hoovered into your planning models, whatever you wish to call them, your planning platforms, to improve planning processes, to improve planning decision-making, and hopefully, we trust, improve outcomes. And you can see this cycle here in the feedback loops of reality being sensed and measured and monitored by an IoT ecosystem, being fed into your planning model, digital twin, et cetera, being driven through various analytical, machine learning, artificial intelligence, decision-making processes, which then, of course, hopefully results in better policies, programs, planning decisions, which impacts reality. And hopefully then, here's the virtuous cycle, we hope, can then be monitored, reviewed, and analysed and evaluated and assessed by your IoT ecosystem. So the IoT world colliding with the planning world is a fantastic way of us keeping an eye on and being accountable for the fantastic planning decisions, plans, master plans, building plans and designs that we are coming up with, are they actually achieving the KPIs, the objectives that we hope for, and how do we improve our planning processes, systems, applications as we move forward? Let's continue on. We're almost finished here. I also want to draw your attention to this, colleagues. Digital twins can do a whole range of things in terms of analysis, but you've got to ask it the right questions. Just imagine very simply, this little hierarchy, you'd all be aware of it, that relates to data analytics. Do you want the digital twin or 3D model to give you descriptive data and analytics? That is, what is happening? It tells you what's going on. Is it diagnostic that you want? Why is it happening? Is it predictive? What is likely to happen? Forecasts, etc. Or prescriptive? What should we do about it? What do we need to do? Now, a digital twin does not automatically give you these levels of information. You need to demand it. You need to design it. You need to prioritize what data you require. And depending on what you prioritize, it means that you need to deliver or design a different digital twin. Let's continue on. I also want to draw your attention to some of the perils of big data. So a KPI should not be that we suck in as much data as possible, because if you look at some of the scientific evidence, mathematical evidence, this paper I draw your attention to by Kalud and Longo 2017, very large databases have to contain arbitrary correlations. Too much information can behave like very little information. The scientific method can be enriched by computer mining in immense data sets, but not replaced by it. And in that regard, have a look at this little diagram by Nassim Nicholas Taleb of Black Swan fame and anti-fragile fame, who shows that when you have an increasing number of variables in a big database, the number of spurious correlations, which is false correlations effectively, increases at an exponential rate. So I'm not meaning to talk you off big data, but I'm just saying be careful. It is not a silver bullet. It is not a panacea. We're almost done here, colleagues. 2 more slides. And in that respect, when it comes, we've been very positive. I'm very excited about digital twins, the evolution of spatial models for planning, but a couple of points. There's more you can add to the list. A model is never reality. It is just a model. It is representation. At best, it is a close replica, but it cannot replicate or duplicate reality. There are always trade-offs between the depth and the breadth of your model. When you increase the size and complexity of your model, you increase cost. Really important to remember. You cannot leave out considerations of accountability and ethics. So just because it's going through a model with algorithms, potentially artificial intelligence, doesn't mean we reduce our reliance on clear accountability and ethical considerations. A model or a digital twin is only one part of the planning world. We also have to consider people, policy, politics, processes, etc. There are analytical trade-offs we've already mentioned. Do you want the digital twin to be descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, or prescriptive? And there is no such thing as data that just tells one story. It is always subject to interpretation and debate. That is fundamental to the scientific method. We move towards consensus, but there is always room for interpretation and debate, particularly when you have models that incorporate aspects of human behavior and the built environment. And finally, colleagues, I believe we are at the next slide, the final slide. Lessons and applications. Plantech and twins are exciting, not silver bullets, okay? So exciting, don't get me wrong, I'm excited, but they're not silver bullets. I want you to think about having many twins or models, not the one and only twin or model. If you think you're going to build a digital twin of the world, whatever your world is, I think you're going to spend a lot of money and you may not get the results you want. So you might be better off building multiple smaller digital twins based on particular use cases than the one and only digital twin to rule them all. Identify specific high value use cases that goes to many twins rather than one and only twin. We've already talked about knowing what data you need and what analysis you want. Dream big but smart, start small. It's okay to be excited. It's also okay to do something that meets a particular need right now without having to do all the things that the hype is telling you that you could and should do. Follow the standards, particularly if you're going to start small. Extensibility and interoperability will help you grow from your small base. Security and privacy is also important. Keep an eye on those costs and benefits. Have business cases developed and have a very strong benefits realization framework. Don't spend all your budget on tech. Okay, if you spend your entire budget building a 3D model, you're going to find that no one will know how to use it. They won't know about it. They won't be convinced by it. It won't be consonant with policies, regulations, and processes that are already in place. Your change management will not keep up with the ability of your 3D model. So be very careful how you allocate money that you get towards building digital models, and collaborate. And in that respect, in particular, talk to your smart city and IoT colleagues, internal and external. That's it from me. Nathan, over to you for final questions from the group.
No worries. Thank you very much, Brooke. So there was a question during your presentation about what is the difference between GIS and digital twins?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. And look, I honestly don't have the entire answer to that. Colleagues, I think that you're probably better placed. My view is that a digital twin is really an evolution of GIS. As I said, the planning sector, you've been at the forefront of the utilisation and adoption of digital technology for many years. GIS, in my mind, I don't really have a problem with people saying, well, look, it's a forerunner or the natural evolution of a digital twin. I think one of the big issues is that we've got better at visualization and the rendering of 3D models. So that's my view. But again, as planners, I think that you could probably come up with a better explanation for the many and multiple detailed differences between the two.
Okay. There was another question here about how large is the task for cleaning up, so to speak, the underlying data that enables the digital twin, or is that something that's done by private companies like the examples you gave from Neighbourlytics?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a question that it depends on the data that you're using. It depends on how much data you're using. It depends how long the data has been around for. So if you're using well-established data sources that people have been using and cleansing for many years, you might find that it's a very small task. But as you increase the number of data sources and reach into potentially new data sources, or data sources that are less accurate or less reliable or more open to interpretation, i.e. data about social activities and intentions and human behavior, then your cleaning task is higher. This relates to a particular point that a good digital twin needs to coexist with a strong digital management framework or digital governance framework.
Okay. And there's two questions here related to this. Do you have any good examples of local government areas currently using digital twins, or an example of a digital twin being used as evidence for a regulatory exercise?
Well, certainly one example is our friends, I believe, in Hobart. They've just been at, I think, Digital Twin Week at Smart Cities Council, talking about the process that they are going through right now in developing and scoping their digital twin, developing the use cases, putting the business case together. I mean, look, I can look back to my time at ACT government. They were using 7 or 8 years ago a fantastic 3D model of the city, which had other elements which made it a digital twin, which they were using in many cases to understand shadow lines, to understand or to better engage with the community. I think there are multiple instances of governments around Australia, local governments that are using them and that are now developing them and evolving them. Okay.
So I think we've only got time for one, sorry, so there's a few here. But in short, there was a question and a few statements that came together. I think they're summarized as saying, at the moment, some planning courses will teach you how to use GIS systems. Do you think with the introduction of digital twins, skills that planners who are currently studying or planners who are currently in practice will need to acquire in order to interact with these things? Because it seems like it's a very GIS department type exercise rather than a planner's exercise.
Oh, look, I mean, my view is that the ability to use the digital twins is something that should be absolutely invested in GIS departments and in planning departments, but also more broadly. I mean, you can see the obvious application beyond planning departments for economic development units, for social planning units, and even for arts, cultural activation units. I mean, my view is that the GIS and planning departments, and indeed the IoT departments, are probably the natural home of your digital twin, but your ability to use it across the organisation, be it a public organisation or a private organisation, that will be the true test of the value of a digital twin. So I'd like to see that capacity in various manifestations and depths of knowledge be expanded across organisations. And I think that that should be part of the development and training programs that organisations are developing for the next 5 years.
Right, no worries. So on that note, I think we have a minute or two left, but if I ask another question, I'm just worried that the answer might spiral out of control and go over time. So I think we'll have to leave that there. Thank you very much, everyone. I just wanted to say in closing, thank you all for attending. There are 2 more sessions in this series, one on digital plan assessment and design, which we talked about a little bit with that Urban Circus example, and then a third one on digital analytics and assessing and resuming things, basically doing modeling. Those are run next week on Tuesday and the week after on Wednesday. Please note that the times of those sessions are a little bit different, and you can find specifics about those on the PIA website. Otherwise, the session's being recorded, slides will be sent around, as will an email with any of the follow-up questions that we've had. I think we've had a few extras and a summary of the responses. So if anyone from PIA New South Wales would like to take over in closing, just for a minute, I believe that might be us done for the day.
Thanks, Nathan, and thanks, colleagues. Really appreciate it. Great to have you with me, and I look forward to answering the other questions via writing. So, and sign up for next week and the week after, where we dig into a few other things relating to planning processes and approval processes, but also urban analytics. So more to come, colleagues, and more to get through, and a very short, sharp, exciting 1-hour sessions.
All right. Thank you, Brooke. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.